The phone call came early that morning. "Don't go skiing today," his friend Rubens Barrichello had pleaded, his voice trembling with worry. "I had a dream. Something bad will happen." Michael Schumacher, seven-time Formula One world champion, had laughed it off. He had survived the most dangerous racetracks in the world at speeds over 200 miles per hour. What could possibly happen on a family ski trip? What no one knew then. The warning wasn't just a dream. The helmet's strange fracture pattern, the mysterious skier who vanished after the accident, the unexplained drug in Michael's system, it would take years to uncover the chilling truth behind the crash that changed everything. But that morning, as the sun painted golden streaks across the snow-capped French Alps, Michael Schumacher opened his eyes and smiled. He loved days like this: crisp mountain air, perfect snow conditions, and time with his family. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the snow-capped French Alps. It was December 29th, 2013. Michael Schumacher opened his eyes and smiled. He loved days like this: crisp mountain air, perfect snow conditions, and time with his family. The legendary Formula One driver stretched in bed, careful not to wake his wife, Corinna, who slept peacefully beside him. Their vacation home in Maribel felt like a perfect escape from the world that knew him as a seven-time world champion. Here, he was just Michael, husband, father, and ski enthusiast. He slipped out of bed and walked to the window, admiring the sparkling white landscape that awaited him. The plan for today was simple: skiing with his family on the stunning slopes of one of France's most beautiful resorts. At 44, Michael still craved speed and adventure, though he had retired from racing for good the previous year. The mountains offered a different kind of thrill, one he could share with his children, 14-year-old Mick and 16-year-old Gina Maria. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Michael frowned. It was barely 7:30 a.m. Who would call so early? The screen showed a familiar name: Rubens Barrichello. His former Ferrari teammate and longtime friend rarely called without reason. Michael stepped into the hallway to answer. "Rubens, everything okay?" Michael asked, his voice still rough from sleep. "Michael." Rubens's voice sounded strange, tight and worried. "I know this will sound crazy, but don't go skiing today." Michael chuckled. "What are you talking about? The conditions are perfect." "I had a dream last night," Rubens continued, his Brazilian accent thicker than usual. "It was so real, Michael. You were in trouble on the mountain. Something bad happened." An smile faded from Michael's face. In their racing days, drivers sometimes talked about premonitions. The sport was dangerous enough to make even the least superstitious men pay attention to unusual feelings. But this was different. This was skiing. His safe haven, his family time. "Come on, Rubens. Since when do you believe in dreams?" Michael tried to keep his tone light. "Remember when you dreamed I would crash in Monaco? I won that race." This was different. Rubens's voice dropped lower. "I've never had a dream like this. I woke up sweating, heart pounding. Promise me you'll be careful. Maybe stay on the easy slopes today." Michael walked toward the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "I'm always careful with my family, you know that. There's something else." Rubens hesitated. "I received a strange email yesterday. Someone asking about your skiing plans." "Probably just a fan." "Maybe." Rubens didn't sound convinced. "The timing with the dream, it worried me." Michael filled a glass with water, watching the morning light dance through it. "I appreciate you looking out for me, old friend. But we've been planning this day all week. The kids are excited." "At least wear your best helmet," Rubens said. "The racing one," Michael laughed. I'm going skiing with my kids, not racing at Monza. My regular helmet will be fine. After a few more minutes of conversation, Michael promised to call Rubens that evening and hung up. He stood in the kitchen, the phone still warm in his hand. Strange how a simple call could change the feeling of a perfect morning. Who was that? Michael turned to see Mick standing in the doorway, his teenage frame looking more like Michael's every day. "Just Uncle Rubens," Michael said, forcing a smile, "wishing us a good vacation." Mick grabbed a glass of orange juice. "Is he still talking about that dream? Mom said he called her yesterday, too." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Corinna didn't mention it. She said he was being silly and superstitious." Mick shrugged. "She didn't want to worry you." Michael nodded, making a mental note to talk with his wife later. It wasn't like Corinna to keep things from him. They had built their life on honesty and trust, values that had sustained them through the high-pressure world of Formula One racing. Everything. "Okay, Dad?" Mick asked, noticing his father's distraction. "Of course." Michael ruffled his son's hair. "We have a perfect day ahead. Go wake your sister while I make breakfast." As Mick left the kitchen, Michael tried to shake the uneasy feeling. Throughout his racing career, he had learned to trust his instincts. Those instincts had saved his life more than once on the track, helping him avoid crashes that could have been fatal. But today, his instincts were sending mixed signals. Part of him wanted to heed Rubens's warning. Another part, the competitive spirit that had made him a champion, refused to let fear dictate his choices. Michael began preparing breakfast, the familiar routine helping to settle his mind. By the time Corinna joined him in the kitchen, eyes still heavy with sleep, he had pushed the phone call to the back of his mind. "Morning, Liebling," he said, kissing her forehead. "Coffee?" She nodded, studying his face. "You seem tense. Did Rubens call you too?" "He did." Michael handed her a steaming mug. "Why didn't you tell me he called yesterday?" Corinna sighed. "Because I know you. You would have worried, and this vacation is supposed to be about relaxing." He's concerned. He's being superstitious. You know how racing drivers get. She touched his arm. "Michael, you've faced the most dangerous racetracks in the world at over 200 miles per hour. You've walked away from crashes that should have been fatal. And now you're worried about a family ski trip because of a bad dream?" Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. Michael smiled, feeling the tension release from his shoulders. "You're right. Of course you're right." Besides, Corinna added, "We're skiing together on familiar slopes. What could possibly happen?" As they finished breakfast and began gathering their ski gear, Michael couldn't help but remember something his old Ferrari technician Paolo Martinelli once told him after a particularly close call at the Brazilian Grand Prix. "You have a guardian angel, Michael. But even angels need rest sometimes." He shook the thought away as he helped Mick adjust his ski boots. Today wasn't about racing or risks. It was about family. And yet, as they loaded into the car for the short drive to the lift station, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something important waited for him on the mountain. Something beyond the simple joy of skiing with his family. He just didn't know if it was something wonderful or terrible. As their car wound its way toward the ski lifts of Maribel, Michael's mind drifted back through the remarkable journey that had brought him here. From humble beginnings to becoming the most successful Formula One driver in history, his life had been anything but ordinary. He glanced at Mick in the rearview mirror, seeing in his son's face echoes of his own childhood determination. Michael had been born in Herth, Germany, to a family of modest means. His father Rolf worked as a bricklayer and ran a small go-kart track on the side. Money was always tight, but never passion. "Dad, remember when you built me my first go-kart?" Michael asked, breaking the comfortable silence in the car. Rolf had scrapped together old parts to create Michael's first racing machine when he was just 4 years old. That little cart, with its wobbling wheels and sputtering engine, had been the beginning of everything. "I wish Grandpa could have seen how far we've come," Mick replied, understanding the depth of his father's question. Corinna reached over and squeezed Michael's hand, knowing how deeply he still felt his father's absence. Rolf had lived long enough to see his son become a world champion, but passed away before witnessing the full scope of Michael's legendary career. The road curved sharply, reminding Michael of the Eau Rouge corner at Spa-Francorchamps, his favorite track. How many times had he taken that legendary curve at over 180 miles per hour, feeling the G-forces compress his body, knowing one small mistake could be catastrophic. "You're thinking about racing again," Corinna said softly. Michael smiled. She could always read him. Just remembering. His mind flashed back to 1991, his first Formula One race with the Jordan team. He had qualified 7th at Spa, shocking everyone. Though his debut ended quickly with clutch failure, the racing world had been put on notice. A special talent had arrived. The next year brought his first victory with Benetton at the Belgian Grand Prix. Michael could still feel the champagne on his face, the weight of the trophy in his hands. By 1994, he had secured his first world championship, though it came amid controversy and the shadow of Ayrton Senna's tragic death at Imola. "We're here!" Gina Maria announced as they pulled into the parking area near the lifts. The family piled out of the car, the crisp mountain air filling Michael's lungs. As they gathered their equipment, his mind continued its journey through time. Fide moved to Ferrari in 1996 had been the turning point. The legendary Italian team was struggling when he arrived, but Michael never feared challenges. For 5 straight years, from 2000 to 2004, he dominated Formula One in a way no one had before or since. 5 consecutive world championships. Breaking record after record. "Dad, race you to the lift," Mick called, pulling Michael back to the present. Michael laughed. "Always competing, just like your father." As they joined the line for the gondola, Michael nodded politely to people who recognized him. Even here, he was never fully anonymous. Fame followed him like a shadow, though in retirement it had softened somewhat. He remembered his first retirement, in 2006, thinking he was done with racing forever. Then the unexpected comeback with Mercedes in 2010, not as successful as his Ferrari years, but important in its own way. It had given him 3 more years in the sport he loved before his final retirement in 2012. "Michael Schumacher, it is really you!" An excited lift operator shook his hand vigorously. "My son will not believe I met the great Schumi." Michael smiled warmly. "What's your son's name?" "Anton. He races go-karts because of you." Michael pulled a small notepad from his pocket. He always carried one for moments like this, and wrote a quick note of encouragement to Anton. The man's grateful smile reminded Michael of the responsibility that came with his success, the way his story inspired others. As their gondola climbed higher into the mountains, Gina Maria pointed out the spectacular view. "Look, Dad, you can see forever from here." The majestic Alps stretched before them, peaks disappearing into wisps of cloud. The beauty wasn't lost on Michael, who had traveled the world, but always felt a special connection to mountains. His mind returned to another special day in the mountains, the day he met Corinna at a Ferrari team party in 1991. She had been dating his teammate at the time, but Michael had been captivated by her intelligence and quiet strength. Years later, when they reconnected, that initial spark had blossomed into love. Their wedding in August 1995 had been a small, private affair, away from the media's prying eyes. Michael had always been protective of his personal life, creating a fortress around his family even as his professional fame grew. Corinna had been his rock, his constant through victory and defeat. "Remember when we brought Gina Maria here for the first time?" Corinna asked, following his gaze out the window. Michael nodded. Their daughter had been just 7, bundled up like a colorful marshmallow in her ski gear. Mick had been even younger, barely 5, but fearless on the slopes from the start. Both of them skiing better than most adults by the time they were 10, Michael said proudly. The gondola reached the top station, and they disembarked into the bright mountain sunshine. As they adjusted their equipment, Michael caught sight of a familiar face. Paolo Martinelli, his former engine chief at Ferrari, was there with his family. "Paolo!" Michael called, waving. The Italian engineer approached with a warm smile and embraced Michael. "What a wonderful surprise! I didn't know you were here this week." "Family tradition," Michael explained. "The kids insist," Paolo greeted Corinna and the children before pulling Michael slightly aside. "I saw the conditions report this morning. Some of the off-piste areas are tricky today, rocks barely covered. We'll stick to the marked trails," Michael assured him. Paolo nodded, then added in a lower voice, "You know, I still remember what I told you after Brazil in 2006. "About my guardian angel?" Michael smiled. "See, but even angels need rest sometimes." Paolo glanced at Michael's helmet. "That's not your usual one?" Michael touched the new helmet. "Testing a mount for a GoPro camera. Mick wants to film some runs." Paolo frowned slightly. "Just be careful, my friend. Modifications can change safety ratings." "Always the engineer," Michael laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. As Paolo rejoined his family, Michael couldn't help feeling that strange unease again. First Rubens's call, now Paolo's concern. It was as if the universe was trying to tell him something. But Michael Schumacher hadn't become a champion by listening to fear. He had always pushed limits, always believed in his ability to control the uncontrollable. It was what made him special on the racetrack. Looking at his family, Corinna helping Gina Maria with her gloves, Mick adjusting his goggles, Michael felt a swell of gratitude. Whatever challenges life had thrown at him, he had faced them and won. He had survived crashes that should have been fatal. He had overcome setbacks that would have broken lesser men. Ready for the first run, he called to his family, pushing the warnings to the back of his mind. What could possibly happen on a family ski day that would be more dangerous than a lifetime of racing on the edge? As they moved toward the top of the trail, Michael didn't notice the tall man watching him from a distance, ski mask hiding most of his face as he spoke quietly into a phone. "It's confirmed. Schumacher is taking the family to the off-piste area. Later," the tall man whispered before tucking his phone away. He adjusted his ski mask and moved toward a different lift, keeping the Schumacher family in his peripheral vision. Michael stood at the summit, breathing in the mountain air that always reminded him of freedom. The groomed run before them was perfect, freshly prepared, not too crowded, and offering spectacular views of the Maribel Valley. "First run is for warming up," Michael announced to his family, his voice carrying the same authority it had when he led the Ferrari team. "We stay together, take it easy, and get our ski legs back." Mick grinned. "Sure, Dad. Take it easy means different things to different people." Michael laughed, recognizing his own competitive spirit in his son. At 14, Mick was already showing the talent and determination that could make him a racer someday, if that's what he chose. they pushed, off down the slope, forming a line with Michael leading, followed by Mick, Gina Maria, and Corinna bringing up the rear. Michael carved graceful turns, his body finding the familiar rhythm that came from decades of skiing. Each winter since he was a boy, the mountains had been his second home. "Show off!" Gina Maria called as Michael executed a perfect turn that sent a small spray of powder into the air. He slowed to let his family catch up, his eyes constantly scanning the slope ahead for any potential hazards. It was second nature to him, the same awareness he had maintained at 200 miles per hour on racetracks around the world. "I was thinking," Michael said as they paused halfway down the run. "After lunch, we could try something more challenging. There's a beautiful off-piste section between Piste Chamois and Piste Mauduit." Corinna raised an eyebrow. "Is that safe with the current conditions? I checked the report this morning. Snow depth is good." Michael pointed to a section of mountain visible between the trees. "We've skied it before. Remember, Mick, 2 years ago?" Mick nodded eagerly. "That was awesome. Can we really go back? There?" "If your mother agrees," Michael said, giving Corinna his most persuasive smile, the same one he had used to charm sponsors and team owners throughout his career. Corinna sighed, knowing she was outnumbered. "Fine, but we follow your line exactly, Michael. No improvising." They completed their first run and took 2 more before stopping for lunch at a mountain restaurant. The simple wooden structure offered hearty food and a terrace with stunning views. As they ate, Michael found himself scanning the other tables, feeling a strange sensation of being watched. "You okay, Dad?" Gina Maria asked, noticing his distraction. "Perfect," he assured her, pushing away the uncomfortable feeling. "Just thinking about our next adventure." After lunch, they made their way toward the area Michael had suggested. The off-piste section wasn't marked on the official trail maps, but it was well known among experienced skiers at Maribel. To reach it, they needed to take the Solier Express lift to the highest point, then ski down a specific path that branched away from the marked trails. As they waited in the lift line, Michael noticed a ski instructor watching them. The man seemed to recognize Michael and moved toward them. "Herr Schumacher," the instructor said in accented English, "I am Felix Dam. I teach here at Maribel." He glanced toward the peak. "If you are planning to go off-piste today, I should warn you. The rocks are barely covered in some sections." "Thanks for the concern," Michael replied, "but I know that section well. We'll be careful." Felix seemed hesitant. "Perhaps the marked trail would be better today. The conditions are changing quickly." "Just one quick run," Michael said with a confident smile. "I've skied this 100 times." Felix nodded respectfully and stepped back. "Of course. Enjoy your day." As the instructor walked away, Corinna gave Michael a questioning look. "Maybe we should reconsider?" "Trust me," Michael said. "I would never put you or the children at risk." The lift carried them up to the summit, where the wind was stronger and the temperature noticeably colder. Michael helped his family adjust, their gear checking that everyone's bindings were secure. "Remember," he instructed, "in the off-piste area, we keep more distance between us. If one person falls, we don't want everyone piling up." As they prepared to set off, Mick pointed to his father's helmet. "Is that new, Dad? I don't remember seeing it before." Michael touched the sleek black helmet. "Not completely new. I added a GoPro mount to try some filming." He showed Mick the small bracket attached to the right side of the helmet. It seemed such a minor modification, just a small piece of plastic and metal secured with special adhesive. "Cool," Mick said. "Will you film this run?" "Not today. Just testing how it feels." Michael adjusted the helmet strap under his chin. "Doesn't affect anything." But as he secured the strap, Michael remembered Paolo's comment about modifications changing safety ratings. He pushed the thought away. The mount was tiny, barely noticeable. How could it possibly affect the helmet's integrity? From a distance, Felix Dam watched the family preparing to head off-piste. Something about the situation made him uneasy. He had seen the weather reports that morning, had himself checked the conditions in that area. The recent snowfall had been light, not enough to fully cover the rocky terrain beneath. Felix noticed something else, too. A skier who seemed to be following the Schumacher family. The man had changed lifts twice, always keeping the family in view, but never approaching. When they headed toward the off-piste area, he followed. For a moment, Felix considered alerting mountain security. But what would he say? That a famous former racing driver was skiing with his family? That another skier happened to be taking the same routes? It sounded paranoid even in his own mind. Michael led his family to the edge of the marked trail, where a small gap between the boundary poles provided access to the off-piste area. He turned to face them one last time. "Follow my tracks exactly," he said. "There's a line through here that avoids most obstacles. It's like threading a needle. Precision matters." He gave Corinna a reassuring nod, then pushed off, gliding smoothly into the untouched powder. The snow sparkled in the afternoon sun, creating a beautiful canvas marked only by Michael's elegant turns. As his family followed, none of them noticed. The tall man who had stopped at the edge of the marked trail, watching intently as Michael navigated the first section of the off-piste area. The man reached into his pocket, checked something, then followed their path into the pristine snow. The untouched snow sparkled like diamonds under the winter sun. Michael moved through it with the same precision that had made him a legend on racetracks around the world. Each turn was calculated, each shift in weight deliberate. Behind him, Mick followed his father's tracks exactly as instructed. The teenager had inherited Michael's natural athletic ability and confidence. Gina Maria came next, more cautious but still skilled, with Corinna bringing up the rear, keeping a watchful eye on both children. The off-piste section started with a gentle slope that gradually steepened. Michael knew that about halfway down, there was a section where exposed rocks often lurked beneath the snow. In previous years, with deeper snow cover, this hadn't been a concern. Today, he would need to navigate carefully. "Looking good," he called back to his family. "Remember to keep your weight on your downhill ski when we reach the steeper section." The tall man who had been following them kept his distance, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but close enough to keep the family in sight. He skied with obvious skill, matching Michael's line almost perfectly. Michael approached a cluster of small pine trees, knowing he needed to make a sharp right turn to avoid a section where rocks were always close to the surface. As he executed the turn, he felt a momentary disorientation, a slight dizziness that came and went so quickly he barely registered it. Strange, he thought. Must be the altitude. "Dad!" Mick called from behind. "There's a big rock just left of your tracks." Michael nodded in acknowledgement, focusing intently on the terrain ahead. The snow here was shallower than he had expected, with occasional dark spots revealing where the white covering was dangerously thin. He adjusted his line slightly, moving farther right than he had planned. This was the heart of the challenging section, the part that made off-piste skiing both thrilling and dangerous. One had to read the snow, sense what lay beneath, make split-second decisions. For a moment, Michael felt perfectly in his element. This was no different from racing, evaluating risks, pushing limits while maintaining control. The mountain air filled his lungs, and he felt truly alive. Then it happened. His right ski struck something hard beneath the seemingly smooth surface, a gray rock barely covered by the recent snowfall. The impact was jarring, sending a shock up through his leg. Michael's balance shifted unexpectedly. In racing, he would have had milliseconds to correct such an error. On the mountain, time seemed to stretch as he fought to regain control. His left ski crossed over his right, a fundamental skiing error he hadn't made since he was a child. "Dad?" Mick called, sensing something wrong. Michael was airborne now, his body twisting as the momentum carried him forward. He caught a glimpse of sky, of treetops, of his son's worried face. In that suspended moment, a strange calm came over him, the same calm he had experienced during his worst racing crashes. Then came the impact. His body hit the snow first, then tumbled. He felt his shoulder strike something solid, then his hip. The world became a spinning blur of white and blue and pain. The final impact came with terrifying suddenness. The right side of his head struck a partially exposed rock with enough force to make a sound that echoed through the mountain silence, a sickening crack that seemed to hang in the cold air. Michael felt no pain from this last impact, only a strange numbness that spread from his head down through his body. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint of light, then darkness began to creep in from the edges. The last thing he heard was Mick's voice, suddenly very young and frightened. "Dad! Dad!" The last thing he felt was the snow against his cheek, strangely warm now instead of cold. The last thing he thought was of Corinna and the children, and a desperate wish that they not see him like this. Then the darkness took him completely. Mick reached his father's motionless form first, his skis sending up a spray of snow as he skidded to a halt. The teenager dropped to his knees beside Michael, his hands hovering uncertainly over his father's still body. "Dad?" Mick's voice broke. "Dad, can you hear me?" Blood was already staining the snow beneath Michael's head, the bright crimson a shocking contrast against the pristine white. Michael's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and irregular. Gina Maria arrived next, her scream piercing the mountain quiet when she saw her father. "Mom, hurry!" Corinna's world collapsed when she reached the scene. The woman who had stood strong through the most intense pressures of Formula One, who had been Michael's rock through victory and defeat, felt her knees give way as she dropped beside her husband. "Michael?" she whispered, gently touching his face. "Michael, please." With trembling hands, she checked for a pulse while instructing Mick to call emergency services. The faint, irregular beating beneath her fingers offered the smallest comfort. He was alive, at least for now. As the family huddled around Michael's still form, the tall man who had been following them stopped a short distance away. He observed the scene for several seconds, then quietly moved back up the slope, disappearing among the trees before anyone noticed his presence. Time seemed to both stop and race forward. Mick's hands shook as he fumbled with his phone, desperately trying to call for help, while Corinna pressed her ski jacket against Michael's head wound. "Stay with us, Michael," she whispered, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "We need you. Stay with us." Gina Maria stood frozen, her young face pale with shock. "Is he going to die?" she asked, her voice small and frightened in a way it hadn't been since she was a little girl. "No," Corinna said firmly. "Your father is a fighter, always has been." But even as she spoke the words, she felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. The blood was soaking through her jacket now, and Michael's breathing had become dangerously shallow. Mick finally connected with emergency services. "My father fell skiing," he explained, his voice cracking. "He hit his head on a rock. He's unconscious and bleeding. Please hurry." By some miracle, a skier appeared on the ridge above them. Felix Dam, the instructor who had warned Michael earlier. He took in the scene with a quick professional glance before skiing directly to them. "I saw what happened from the trail," he said, kneeling beside Michael. "I called ski patrol already. They're on their way." Felix checked Michael's vital signs with practiced movements. The grim set of his mouth told Corinna everything before he spoke. "His pulse is weak and irregular," Felix said quietly. "We need to stabilize his neck and keep him warm until help arrives." Within minutes, the peaceful mountain silence was broken by the sound of approaching rescuers. 2 members of the ski patrol arrived first, carrying emergency medical equipment. They were followed closely by a man who introduced himself as Dr. Olivier Laurent, part of the resort's medical team. "What happened?" Dr. Laurent asked as he quickly assessed Michael. "He hit a rock while skiing," Felix explained. "Right side of his head took the impact. He's been unconscious since the fall, about 10 minutes now." Dr. Laurent's expression grew more serious as he examined Michael's pupils. "Unequal and sluggish," he muttered. Looking up at his team, he issued rapid instructions. "Cervical collar, backboard, and warming blankets. And call the helicopter. Now." One of the patrollers looked uncertain. "The nearest landing zone is—" "I don't care," Dr. Laurent cut him off. "We're losing the golden hour. Find somewhere they can land closer." Turning to Corinna, he explained, "The first 60 minutes after a traumatic brain injury are critical. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." While the rescue team worked to stabilize Michael, Corinna gathered Mick and Gina Maria close. "We need to be strong for Dad," she told them. "Mick, I need you to ski back to the main trail with Felix. Tell the helicopter where to land. Gina Maria, stay with me." Mick nodded, his young face setting into a determination that made him look startlingly like his father. He and Felix moved quickly up the slope to guide the emergency helicopter. Dr. Laurent worked feverishly, inserting an IV line into Michael's arm and administering medications. "His blood pressure is dropping," he said to his team. "We need to move now." The team transferred Michael onto a specialized backboard, taking extreme care to keep his spine aligned. They secured his head with blocks and straps, then wrapped him in thermal blankets. "Mrs. Schumacher," Dr. Laurent said, looking at Corinna, "we're going to take him to Moutier Hospital first. It's closest, then likely transferred to Grenoble for specialized care." Corinna nodded, trying to process the information through her shock. "I'll come in the helicopter. I'm sorry, there won't be room. Please meet us at Moutier." He handed her a card. "This has the address. Do you have someone who can drive you?" Before she could answer, they heard the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. The aircraft appeared over the ridge, hovering as the pilot assessed where to land on the uneven terrain. As the rescue team prepared to move Michael, Corinna bent down and whispered in his ear, "Fight, Michael, like you've always done. We're waiting for you." She watched as they carried him up the slope to where the helicopter had found a small clearing to land. The wind from the rotors whipped snow into the air, creating a surreal scene as her husband's motionless form was loaded into the aircraft. Inside the helicopter, flight nurse Sophie Bellamy worked alongside Dr. Laurent to stabilize Michael. As ICD, they cut away his helmet to better assess his injuries. Sophie noticed something unusual. "Doctor, look at this," she said, pointing to the way the helmet had split. "This fracture pattern is strange. It's not consistent with a typical impact." Dr. Laurent glanced at it briefly. "Bag it for evidence. Might be important later." Sophie carefully placed the damaged helmet in a plastic bag. noting the small GoPro mount on the side. She had seen many skiing accidents in her years working. Mountain rescue. But something about this one felt different. Wrong, somehow. Back on the mountain, Corinna, Mick, and Gina Maria watched the helicopter disappear into the distance. The sound of the rotors faded, leaving them in a terrible silence. "Mom, what happens now?" Mick asked, his voice small against the vast quiet of the mountain. "Now we follow him," Corinna said, switching into the practical mode that had served her well through decades in the high-pressure world of Formula One. "Felix, can you help us get back to the resort quickly?" As they prepared to leave, Corinna noticed ski tracks leading away from the accident site. Tracks that didn't belong to any rescue personnel or her family. She mentioned it to Felix. "Someone was here, watching," Felix said quietly. "I saw him earlier, following your family. He left just as I arrived." "Did you recognize him?" Felix shook his head. His face was covered, but he seemed purposeful. Corinna filed this information away, too overwhelmed with Michael's condition to process its significance. Right now, all that mattered was getting to the hospital. At Maribel Resort, news was already spreading. A worker had recognized the name on the emergency call and whispered to a colleague. Within minutes, phones were buzzing with messages. Michael Schumacher, 7-time Formula One world champion, had been critically injured in a skiing accident. By the time Corinna and the children reached the base station, reporters were already gathering. Felix helped them avoid the growing crowd, leading them through a service entrance to where their car waited. As Corinna started the engine, her phone rang. It was Jean Todt, Michael's former boss at Ferrari, and one of their closest friends. "Corinna," his voice came through, heavy with concern. "I just heard. Is it true? How bad is it?" She gripped the steering wheel tightly, the children watching her with frightened eyes. "It's bad, Jean," she whispered. "It's very bad." The drive to Moutier Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Corinna's life. Beside her, Mick stared silently out the window, while Gina Maria quietly sobbed in the back seat. Jean Todt had promised to call other close friends and to catch the first flight from Italy to France. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he had assured her. Michael is strong. Remember Brazil 2006? The doctors said he wouldn't race again after that crash. He was back in the car 6 weeks later. Corinna clung to these words as she navigated the winding mountain roads. Michael had survived so much. The pressure of competition, the dangers of racing, crashes that would have killed other drivers. Surely he could survive this too. When they arrived at the small regional hospital in Moutier, chaos greeted them. Word had spread, and journalists were already gathered outside the entrance. A hospital security guard recognized Corinna and quickly ushered the family through a side door. Inside, a nurse led them to a small waiting room. "The doctor will speak with you soon," she said kindly. "Your husband is being assessed now." Chatru minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Corinna held her children's hands, drawing strength from their presence, even as she tried to project calm for their sake. Finally, a doctor entered. Not Dr. Laurent from the mountain, but an older man who introduced himself as Dr. Bernard Vignon, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine. "Mrs. Schumacher," he said gravely, "your husband's condition is extremely serious. The CT scan shows severe trauma to the right side of his brain, with intracranial bleeding and swelling." Corinna felt the room tilt slightly. "But you can help." "Him?" Dr. Vignon's expression grew more serious. "This facility is not equipped for the level of neurosurgical care he requires. We're arranging an immediate transfer to Grenoble University Hospital. They have one of the best neurosurgical teams in France. How bad is it, really? Corinna asked, needing to hear the unvarnished truth. In cases like this, we measure survival first, then recovery, Dr. Vignon said carefully. Right now, our concern is survival. The next 24 hours will be critical. The words hit Corinna like a physical blow. Beside her, Mick gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. When will they move him to Grenoble? She asked, focusing on practical matters to keep from collapsing under the weight of fear. The helicopter is being prepared now. It's about a 15-minute flight. Dr. Laurent will accompany him. As they spoke, Corinna's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, team members, and Michael's management team. The news was spreading worldwide. In Maranello, Italy, Ferrari chairman Luca di Montezemolo had collapsed into a chair when his assistant delivered the news. Michael wasn't just a former driver, he was family, the man who had restored Ferrari to glory after years of struggle. In London, Lewis Hamilton, who had replaced Michael at Mercedes, called the team in tears when he heard. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked Toto Wolff, the team principal. "Anything at all?" In Geneva, Sebastian Vettel, Michael's protégé, cancelled his holiday plans and headed for his car, determined to reach Grenoble as quickly as possible. Back at Moutier Hospital, Dr. Laurent appeared, still wearing his emergency gear. "We're ready to transport him," he told Corinna. The neurosurgical team in Grenoble is standing by. Dr. Emmanuel Gay will be leading his care there. He's one of the best in Europe. "Can I see Michael before you go?" Corinna asked. Dr. Laurent hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. "But I must warn you, he's been intubated and has multiple monitors attached. It might be difficult to see him this way." "I need to see him," Corinna insisted. "And the children. Perhaps just you for now," Dr. Laurent suggested gently. "It can be traumatic for young people." Mick stepped forward, his jaw set in a determined line despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm going with Mom. Dad would want us to be brave." Dr. Laurent looked at the 14-year-old boy and saw something of Michael in his expression. He nodded. "All right, but just for a moment." They followed, him through the emergency department to a trauma room where Michael lay surrounded by equipment. The sight of him, pale, intubated, with his head partially shaved and bandaged, was almost more than Corinna could bear. She approached the bedside and gently touched his hand, careful not to disturb any of the lines or monitors. "We're here, Michael," she whispered. "We're waiting for you to come back to us." Mick stood beside her, silently looking at his father, the man who had always seemed invincible now looking so vulnerable. He reached out and touched Michael's arm. "Fight, Dad," he said simply. The transfer to the helicopter was executed with efficient precision. Corinna, Mick, and Gina Maria watched as Michael was loaded into the aircraft. As the helicopter lifted off, Corinna felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had she watched Michael being airlifted from racetracks after crashes? But this was different. This wasn't a race with rules and safety measures. This was life and death in its purest form. They drove to Grenoble immediately, the journey taking just over an hour. By the time they arrived at the university hospital, Michael was already in surgery. Dr. Emmanuel Gay, a renowned neurosurgeon with over 20 years of experience, met briefly with Corinna before the operation. "We need to perform a decompressive craniectomy," he explained. "We'll remove part of his skull to allow the brain room to swell without causing further damage. Once the swelling subsides, we can replace the bone." "Will he?" Corinna struggled to form the question. Will he be himself afterward? Dr. Gay's expression was compassionate but honest. Mrs. Schumacher, right now we're fighting for his life. Questions of recovery, those come later. But I promise you, we will do everything humanly possible. As Dr. Gay returned to the operating room, Corinna and the children were shown to a private waiting area. Outside the hospital, fans had begun to gather despite the cold, holding vigils with candles and Ferrari flags. Inside the operating theater, Dr. Gay worked with meticulous precision. The surgery would last hours, a delicate dance to relieve pressure without causing additional trauma to Michael's already damaged brain. During a brief moment when Dr. Gay stepped away from the table, an assistant surgeon noticed something unusual. "Doctor, look at these contusions," he said, pointing to a pattern on the exposed brain tissue. "The impact pattern is strange, almost as if there were multiple points of force rather than a single blow." Dr. Gay examined the area. "Document it thoroughly," he instructed. "It might be important for understanding the exact mechanism of injury." As the surgery continued into the night, the world held its breath, waiting for news about the man who had been not just a racing driver, but a cultural icon, a symbol of excellence, determination, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. In the waiting room, Corinna sat between her children, their hands linked in a chain of love and fear and hope. As the clock ticked off seconds that felt like hours. While Michael fought for his life in surgery, Inspector Thomas Rousseau of the Albertville Police arrived at the Maribel Ski Resort. At 53, Rousseau had investigated dozens of skiing accidents in his 20-year career, but never one involving someone as famous as Michael Schumacher. "Show me exactly where it happened," he instructed the resort's safety director, who had been asked to cooperate with the police investigation, standard procedure for serious accidents. They took a snowmobile to the off-piste area between Piste, Chamois, and Piste, Mauduit. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow, making the rocks stand out in stark relief. Rousseau could see immediately why this area could be treacherous with insufficient snow cover. The family was skiing. "Here?" he asked, surveying the challenging terrain. "Monsieur Schumacher knew this area well," the safety director explained. "He has skied here many times before." Rousseau nodded, taking photographs and making notes in his small black notebook. He marked the spot where Michael had fallen, identified by the disturbed snow and faint traces of blood that remained despite efforts to clean the area. "Were there any witnesses besides the family?" Rousseau asked. The ski instructor, Felix Dam, saw it happen from a distance. He was the first responder besides the family. Rousseau made a note to interview Dam as soon as possible. As he continued, examining the scene, something caught his attention. A set of ski tracks that approached the accident site from an unusual angle, then veered away sharply. "Whose tracks are these?" he asked. "They don't match the rescue team's approach or the family's line." The safety director frowned. "I don't know. Perhaps another skier who saw the accident and went for help?" "Perhaps," Rousseau said, not entirely convinced. He took photographs of the mysterious tracks before they could be obscured by wind or new snowfall. As daylight faded, Rousseau returned to his office with the preliminary evidence. Among the items collected was Michael's damaged helmet, sealed, in an evidence bag by the flight nurse who had noticed its unusual fracture pattern. In the small evidence room, technician Marie Dubois carefully documented each item. When she reached the helmet, she examined it with particular interest. "Inspector, look at this," she called to Rousseau. "The fracture pattern is unusual." Rousseau joined her at the examination table. The helmet had split in a way he hadn't seen before in skiing accidents. Not a clean crack from a single impact, but a more complex pattern suggesting multiple points of failure. Could it be from multiple impacts during the fall? He asked. Marie shook her head. Unlikely. See this area here where the GoPro mount was attached? The material seems thinner, almost compromised. Send it to the lab in Lyon, Rousseau decided. I want a complete analysis. Meanwhile, at Grenoble University Hospital, Dr. Gay emerged from the operating room after nearly 6 hours of surgery. He found Corinna, Mick, and Gina Maria still waiting, now joined by Jean Todt, who had arrived from Italy. The surgery went as well as could be expected, Dr. Gay told them, his exhaustion evident. We've removed part of the skull to allow the EBD brain room to swell. The next 24 hours will be crucial. When will he wake up? Gina Maria asked, her young voice breaking. Dr. Gay's expression softened. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to give his brain the best chance to heal. It's too early to talk about waking up. But he will wake up, right? Mick insisted. The doctor placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Your father is receiving the best possible care. That's all we can promise right now. As the Schumacher family absorbed this difficult news, the helmet from the accident arrived at the specialized laboratory in Lyon. Dr. Pierre Clement, a forensic expert with a background in materials science, began his examination immediately, despite the late hour. The case demanded urgency. Under bright lights and high magnification equipment, Dr. Clement meticulously documented every aspect of the damaged helmet. When he reached the area where the GoPro mount had been attached, he paused. This is unusual, he murmured to himself. The mount had been secured with a special adhesive to the helmet's outer shell, but instead of strengthening the attachment point, the process appeared to have compromised the helmet's integrity. The adhesive had seemingly interacted with the helmet material, creating microscopic weaknesses that spread like a web through the critical impact zone. Dr. Clement continued his analysis through the night, running tests and comparing the results to manufacturer specifications. By morning, his suspicion had become certainty. The modified helmet had failed in a way an unmodified one likely would not have. The GoPro mount, a seemingly insignificant addition, had fundamentally altered how the helmet responded to impact. Instead of distributing the force as designed, the modified helmet had concentrated it in one area, directly affecting the part of Michael's brain most severely injured. Back at the hospital, word of Dr. Clement's preliminary findings reached Inspector Rousseau. He sat in the hospital cafeteria, considering the implications. Was this simply an unfortunate modification that had tragic consequences? Or was there something more sinister at work? He thought about the strange ski tracks at the accident site, the unknown skier who had been following the Schumacher family. Coincidences existed, but in Rousseau's experience, they were rare. As he pondered these questions, Rousseau watched the stream of visitors arriving to support the family. Racing drivers, team principals, longtime friends. Among them, he noticed a tall man he didn't recognize, moving with purpose toward the private wing where Michael lay unconscious. Something about the man's gait and the way he scanned his surroundings triggered Rousseau's investigative instincts. The inspector rose from his seat, intending to follow, but before he could move, the man disappeared into a restricted hallway. Using an access card, Rousseau hadn't seen him present to security. Who was he? And how had he gained such access to one of the most closely guarded patients in France? Days passed, blurring together in the artificial timelessness of the hospital. Michael remained in a medically induced coma, his condition listed as critical but stable. For Corinna, these words became both a comfort and a torment. Stable meant he wasn't getting worse, but critical meant he was still far from safe. She rarely left his side, sleeping on a cot the nurses had placed in his room. When exhaustion finally claimed her, the steady beeping of monitors became the soundtrack to her restless dreams. The hospital had allocated an entire floor to managing Michael's care and security. Journalists camped outside the building, desperate for any update. Each day, the hospital's medical director delivered a brief statement, carefully worded to provide information without invading the family's privacy. "Michael Schumacher remains in a stable but critical condition," became the phrase repeated each day, offering neither hope nor despair to the waiting world. Inside Michael's room, the reality was more complex. Doctors performed daily neurological assessments, looking for any signs of improvement. Machines breathed for him and monitored every function of his body. His head, partially shaved for the surgery, was wrapped in bandages that needed regular changing. Corinna developed a routine, speaking to Michael constantly, believing somewhere in his unconscious mind he could hear her. She read messages from friends, told him about the Children's Day, and recounted favorite memories from their life together. "Remember our first date, Michael?" she whispered one evening, holding his unresponsive hand. "That little restaurant in Monaco where you spilled wine all over the white tablecloth? You were so embarrassed." The great Michael Schumacher, perfectly controlled on the track, but nervous on a date. Outside in the waiting area, Mick and Gina Maria tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They completed schoolwork sent by their teachers and accepted the quiet support of the extended Formula One family that filtered through in shifts. Jean Tot visited regularly, sitting by Michael's bed for hours. Their friendship spanned decades, from their dominant years together at Ferrari to life beyond racing. "Fight, Michael," he would whisper. "You never gave up on the track. Don't give up now." After 2 weeks of this limbo, Dr. Gay called a meeting with Corinna and the medical team. "We're going to begin slowly reducing the medication keeping him in the coma," he explained. "It's time to see if he can progress to the next stage of recovery." "What should we expect?" Corinna asked, simultaneously hopeful and terrified. "The process is gradual," Dr. Gay explained. "We'll reduce the medication over several days and monitor how his brain responds. Best case, he'll show signs of consciousness, maybe small movements or responses to stimuli. Worst case," he paused, "he may remain unresponsive." The process began the next day. As the medications were slowly decreased, the family and medical team watched for any sign that Michael was returning to them. Hours stretched into days with agonizing slowness. On the third day, a nurse thought she saw Michael's eyelids flutter. By the fourth day, monitors detected slight changes in brain activity when Corinna spoke to him. Small victories that fueled desperate hope. But as the medication levels dropped further, Michael remained largely unresponsive. His body was alive, sustained by medical intervention, but the essence of who he was, the brilliant mind, the competitive spirit, the loving father, seemed trapped somewhere beyond reach. Medical debates ensued. Some doctors believed the damage was too severe, that Michael would never wake up. Others, led by Dr. Gay, counseled patience. "Brain injuries are unpredictable," Dr. Gay explained to Corinna during a difficult conversation in his office. "Some patients surprise us after months or even years." "What are his real chances?" Corinna asked, needing truth more than comfort. Dr. Gay considered carefully before answering. "Based on the scans and his current responses, the likelihood of a full recovery is very small. But a partial recovery? That remains possible." "Define partial," Corinna pressed. "He might wake up but have significant cognitive or physical impairments. He might recognize you but not be able to speak. He might speak but not remember who he is." Dr. Gay leaned forward. The brain is still largely a mystery to us, Mrs. Schumacher. What I can tell you is that your husband has always been exceptional. Perhaps he will be exceptional in this too. Outside the hospital, the world's attention began to drift as days without significant news stretched into weeks. The media crowds thinned. New stories pushed Michael's condition from headlines to smaller updates. But for those who loved him, nothing else mattered. Sebastian Vettel flew in between races, sitting quietly with Mick, offering the young boy strength without empty promises. Ross Brawn, Michael's longtime technical director and friend, brought photos from their championship years and placed them around the room. "I've seen him overcome the impossible before," Braun told Corinna. "If anyone can beat this, it's Michael." Catru. January turned to February. The doctors recommended moving Michael to a specialized rehabilitation facility. But Corinna had different ideas. "I want to bring him home," she stated firmly during a meeting with the medical team. Dr. Gay looked surprised. "Mrs. Schumacher, the level of care he requires is extensive. Even the best private nursing wouldn't be the same as a specialized facility." "Then we'll create a facility," Corinna said with quiet determination. "At our home on Lake Geneva. Whatever equipment is needed, whatever staff is required, money is not an issue." "It would be extraordinarily expensive," Dr. Gay cautioned. "Michael Finanti gave everything to be the best," Corinna replied. "Now it's my turn to give everything for him." Plans were made. A section of their lakeside estate would be converted into a state-of-the-art medical facility. Equipment identical to what the hospital used would be purchased and installed. A team of specialists, doctors, nurses, therapists, would be hired, all required to sign strict confidentiality agreements. The estimated cost was staggering, over $150,000 per week. But Corinna didn't hesitate. Michael's career had brought them immense wealth, but she would have spent her last cent to bring him home, to have him near his children, in the place where they had been happiest. In March, nearly 3 months after the accident, Michael Schumacher left Grenoble University Hospital by private ambulance, transferred to the home where the next chapter of his long journey would unfold. As the gates of their estate closed behind the ambulance, Corinna made another decision. From now on, Michael's condition would remain private, a closely guarded secret shared only with those who truly loved him, not with a world of strangers hungry for details of his suffering. The long silence had begun. The Schumacher estate on Lake Geneva had always been a sanctuary, a place where Michael could escape the pressures of fame and simply be a husband and father. Now, it became something else entirely. A fortress of care and protection, a private medical facility disguised as a family home. The East Wing had been transformed during Michael's hospital stay. Hospital beds, monitoring equipment, rehabilitation, devices and medication storage units now occupied rooms that had once hosted family gatherings. A nursing station replaced a guest bedroom. The swimming pool was retrofitted for hydrotherapy. When Michael arrived, a team of 16 specialists was waiting. Doctors, nurses, physical therapists, and neurological experts, all hand-picked, and required to sign confidentiality agreements so strict that some lawyers had questioned their enforceability. "This is your home now too," Corinna told the medical team on their first day. "But remember, this is first and foremost our family home. Michael is not just your patient. He's a husband, a father, a son, a friend." For Mick and Gina Maria, having their father home brought both comfort and new challenges. The constant presence of medical staff meant there was never true privacy. The sounds of medical equipment became the new soundtrack of their home. Yet, they could visit their father whenever they wanted, without hospital visiting hours or the watchful eyes of strangers. "I like to do my homework in Dad's room," Mick told his mother one evening. "It feels like he's helping me, like before." Gina Maria found comfort in bringing her riding trophies to show her father. She'd inherited his competitive spirit and channeled it into equestrian sports rather than racing. Dad always said finding your passion is what matters, not what that passion is, she explained to one of the nurses. Corinna established a new normal for the family. She involved the children in Michael's care when appropriate, believing it was healthier for them to participate than to be shielded from reality. They would read to their father, tell him about their day, play his favorite music. The medical team was impressed with this approach. Family involvement is often the best medicine, Dr. Martel, the neurologist who now led Michael's care, observed. Familiar voices and routines can stimulate brain activity in ways our treatments cannot. The family's fierce protection of Michael's privacy soon became legendary. Journalists who attempted to get information found themselves confronting not just security guards, but legal action. Drones that flew over the property were tracked to their operators, who received cease and desist letters within hours. Corinna personally reviewed all staff, refusing to hire anyone with connections to media outlets, no matter how tenuous. The few approved visitors, mostly old racing friends, were required to leave phones and cameras in a secure locker before entering. Jean Todt remained one of the most regular visitors. The former Ferrari boss had been more than a team principal. To Michael, he had been a mentor, a friend, almost a second father. "I visit him a lot," Todt told Corinna one evening as they shared a quiet dinner after he had spent hours at Michael's bedside. "I still have hope. And while there is hope, we keep fighting." Hope came in small moments. A finger that moved in apparent response to a question. Changes in brainwave patterns when family photos were shown. Eyes that seemed to track movement across the room on particularly good days. Other days brought setbacks, infections that threatened his fragile stability, equipment malfunctions that caused momentary panic, the slow muscle atrophy that occurred despite the best physical therapy. Through it all, Corinna remained the family's center of gravity. She managed Michael's business interests, made decisions about his medical care, shielded the children from the worst moments, and somehow found strength to continue when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. 6 months after bringing Michael home, Corinna received a visit from Ross Braun, Michael's former technical director and the strategic mastermind behind many of his greatest victories. After spending time with Michael, Ross and Corinna walked by the lake, the June sunshine sparkling on the water. "How do you do it?" Ross asked, finally. "How do you stay so strong?" Corinna watched a family of swans glide past before answering. "I don't have a choice. Michael would do the same for me. He never gave up. Not in a race, not in life. I won't give up on him." Ross nodded, understanding completely. "The Michael I knew is still in there. I believe he can hear us when we speak to him." Later that evening, after Ross had gone, a reporter approached him outside his hotel. "Mr. Braun, any update on Michael Schumacher's condition?" the journalist called out. Ross paused, his expression unreadable. Then he simply said, "Michael is being cared for by his family with the same passion and commitment he showed on the track. Beyond that, his privacy deserves respect." The reporter pressed further. "But how is he, really? The world wants to know." "The world," Ross replied evenly, "does not have that right." As months turned into years, the Schumacher family retreated, further from public view. Mick grew into a young man who increasingly resembled his father, not just in appearance, but in his quiet determination and emerging racing talent. Gina Maria continued to excel in equestrian competitions, her name sometimes drawing whispers of recognition that had nothing to do with her own accomplishments. Through it all, Michael remained at the center of their world, physically present, but existing in a state that neither his family nor his doctors fully understood. Could he comprehend what was happening around him? Did he recognize the voices of those who loved him? Was he, in some way, still the Michael they had known? These questions had no definitive answers, yet his family acted as if the answers were all yes. They lived as if Michael understood everything, as if each word reached him in whatever distant place his mind now resided. In the special room that had been prepared for him, photographs from his racing days lined the walls. Michael on the podium in Ferrari red, Michael embracing Corinna after a championship win, Michael teaching a young Mick to drive a go-kart. His racing trophies gleamed in custom-built cabinets. Every day, Corinna read him racing news, especially as Mick began his own journey through the junior formulas toward Formula One. She believed, without concrete evidence, but with absolute faith, that Michael could hear and understand, that somewhere inside, the champion still lived. "He's still fighting," she told the few close friends allowed to visit. "And as long as he fights, we fight alongside him." While the Schumacher family focused entirely on Michael's care, Inspector Thomas Rousseau had not forgotten the unanswered questions surrounding the accident. Though officially the case was classified as a skiing mishap, certain details continued to trouble him. 2 years after the accident, Rousseau sat in his office in Albertville, reviewing the file that had never been fully closed. On his desk lay photographs of the accident scene, reports from forensic experts, and interview transcripts that he had read countless times. The official narrative was straightforward enough. Michael Schumacher, an experienced skier, had fallen in an off-piste area, striking his head on a rock. A tragic accident, nothing more. Yet Rousseau's instincts told him there was more to the story. He focused again on Dr. Clement's report about the helmet. The forensic expert had been unequivocal. The GoPro mount had created a critical weakness in the helmet's structure. Without that modification, the helmet would likely have protected Michael from the worst of the impact. But was it just bad luck? Rousseau muttered to himself. Or something else? The inspector had spent decades investigating crimes in the French Alps. He had seen accidents caused by negligence, by recklessness, occasionally by deliberate action. This case didn't fit neatly into any category. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Marie Dubois from the evidence lab. "Inspector, we were doing the annual review of open cases," she said. "I found something unusual in the Schumacher file. There's a witness statement that was never fully processed. A ski instructor named Felix Dam." "I interviewed Dam," Rousseau replied, confused. "He was first on the scene after the family." "Yes, but he requested a follow-up interview." "A week later. It seems it never happened. There's just a note saying he had additional information about another skier in the area." Rousseau felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. How had this been missed? He thanked Marie and immediately began searching for current contact information for Felix Dam. The following day, Rousseau drove to Chamonix, where Dam now worked at a different ski resort. The instructor seemed surprised to see the inspector after so much time had passed. "I assumed the case was closed," Dam said, as they sat in a quiet corner of a mountain restaurant, "that it was determined to be just an accident. I'm tying up loose ends," Rousseau explained. "You wanted to provide additional information back then?" Dam nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I saw something, someone, that I didn't mention in my first statement. I wasn't sure it was relevant, but it kept bothering me." "Tell me now." "There was a skier following the Schumacher family that day," Dam explained. a tall man. He seemed to be staying just far enough back not to be noticed, but he was matching their route exactly. Could he have been a fan? Rousseau asked. Schumacher was very famous. Maybe, but his behavior seemed purposeful. He was watching them, not approaching for an autograph. And after the accident, he left quickly, in the opposite direction from where help would come. Rousseau leaned forward. Would you recognize this man if you saw him again? His face was mostly covered by a mask and goggles. But there was something distinctive about him. He had a small red pin on his jacket. It looked like a chess piece. A knight, I think. The inspector made careful notes. A man with a chess piece pin was thin evidence after so much time, but it was the first new lead in years. There's something else, Dam added hesitantly. Just before they went off-piste, I warned Schumacher about the conditions. He seemed fine, then completely in control. But when I watched him through binoculars a few minutes later, just before he fell, he seemed to, I don't know how to describe it, hesitate suddenly, like he was dizzy or disoriented. That wasn't in your original statement. I wasn't sure what I saw from that distance, and with everything that happened after, it slipped my mind until days later. This new information aligned with something that had always bothered Rousseau. Michael. Schumacher had been an exceptional athlete with world-class balance and coordination. Even on a challenging slope, a simple fall seemed incongruous with his skills. After leaving Dam, Rousseau drove not back to his office, but to the laboratory in Lyon. Dr. Clement was surprised to see him. The Schumacher case? The forensic expert said, I thought that was long settled. I'm revisiting some aspects, Rousseau explained. Was there anything in your examination of the helmet or other evidence that might suggest Schumacher was impaired before the fall? Disoriented, perhaps? Dr. Clement considered the question. Nothing concrete, but we were focused on the helmet damage, not toxicology. The hospital would have done standard blood work, though. They did, Rousseau confirmed. Nothing unusual was reported. Were they specifically looking for anything unusual? Dr. Clement asked pointedly. There are compounds that don't show up in standard screens, especially if you don't know to look for them. This comment lodged in Rousseau's mind. He spent the drive back to Albertville considering its implications. If Michael had been disoriented before the fall, if someone had been following him that day, if the helmet had been compromised, individually, each could be explained away. Together, they suggested a disturbing possibility. Back at his office, Rousseau created a new case file, separate from the original accident investigation. In it, he placed his notes from the meeting with Dam and began adding other elements that had never fit neatly into the accident narrative. The unidentified man seen at the hospital, the unusual damage to the helmet, the mysterious ski tracks leading away from the accident site. He labeled the file, Schumacher, possible foul play. The next day, Rousseau requested the complete medical records from Grenoble University Hospital. Most had been sealed at the family's request, but as an active investigator, he had legal authority to review them. Dr. Laurent, who had been first to on the scene and had accompanied Michael to the hospital, agreed to meet with Rousseau to discuss the case. I remember it clearly, Dr. Laurent said when they met at the hospital. Every detail of that day is burned into my memory. Was there anything unusual in his initial blood work? Rousseau asked. Anything that might indicate he was impaired? Before the fall, Dr. Laurent frowned, thinking back. There was something, a slight anomaly in one of the panels. I noted it at the time, but with the critical nature of his injuries, it wasn't pursued. The focus was on saving his life, not determining why he fell. Could I see those original results? The doctor located the files after some searching. Together, they examined the blood work from Michael's admission to the hospital. Dr. Laurent pointed to a sequence of numbers in the toxicology report. See, this elevation here? It's subtle, but outside normal parameters. At the time, I assumed it was related to the body's stress response to trauma. Now, I'm not so sure. What else could cause this pattern? Rousseau asked. Dr. Laurent's expression grew troubled. There are certain compounds, some legitimate medications, some not, that could produce this signature. Without specific testing, it would be impossible to identify exactly what. Could such compounds affect balance or coordination? Cause momentary disorientation? Absolutely, Dr. Laurent confirmed. Some are designed specifically for that purpose. As Rousseau left the hospital, the pieces were beginning to align into a disturbing picture. But a critical question remained. If someone had deliberately caused or contributed to Michael Schumacher's accident, who would want to harm the retired racing legend? And why? The years passed, and Michael Schumacher's condition remained largely unknown to the public. Rumors circulated constantly. Some claimed he was making remarkable progress, others that he remained in a vegetative state. The truth lay somewhere between these extremes, known only to the tight circle of family, medical staff, and close friends who maintained their vow of silence. For the Schumacher family, life had found a new rhythm. Corinna continued to manage Michael's care with unwavering dedication. Gina Maria pursued her equestrian career, winning competitions across Europe, and Mick, now 18, was following directly in his father's footsteps. In 2018, Mick joined the Formula 2 Championship, the final stepping stone before Formula 1. For his race in Monaco, the iconic street circuit where his father had won 5 times, Mick wore a special helmet painted in his father's famous red design. In the Ferrari garage, mechanics who had worked with Michael years earlier watched the young man with tears in their eyes. The resemblance was uncanny, not just in appearance, but in the focused determination, the methodical approach to racing that had made his father legendary. It's like seeing a ghost, one veteran Ferrari engineer whispered to another, but a good ghost, like Michael has come back through his son. After the race, Mick returned to Lake Geneva. As always, his first stop was his father's room. I finished 5th, Dad, he said, sitting beside the bed where Michael rested. Still learning the track. I know you'd say Monaco takes years to master. Whether Michael understood these conversations remained a mystery even to his doctors. But the family continued them faithfully, believing that somewhere inside, Michael was still present, still listening. Each family member had their own routine with him. Mick talked racing. Gina Maria told stories about her horses. Corinna read the daily news and managed the practical aspects of his care. One constant in their schedule was reading racing news to Michael. Corinna believed this especially important, keeping him connected to the world that had been his life for so long. Over the years, the medical team had noted something curious. When racing was discussed, particularly Ferrari's results, or Mick's progress, the monitors sometimes showed subtle changes in Michael's brain activity, small fluctuations that suggested, perhaps, some level of recognition or response. Dr. Anna Keller, the neurologist who had replaced Dr. Martel on the medical team, was particularly interested in these patterns. The brain is remarkably resilient, she explained to Corinna. In cases like Michael's, certain neural pathways can remain active even when others are damaged. Do you think he understands what we're saying? Corinna asked. The question she had asked countless doctors over the years. I believe he processes information on some level, Dr. Keller replied carefully. Whether that's full comprehension or something more basic, we can't know for certain. But there's definitely activity when you speak to him, especially about subjects that were important in his life. This gave the family renewed hope, a precious commodity after so many years of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Inspector Rousseau's investigation continued quietly. He had pursued the trail of the mysterious skier with the chess piece pin, searching through security footage from hotels and ski rentals near Maribel around the time of the accident. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a hotel clerk. In Courchevel, a resort near Maribel, remembered a guest who matched the description. Very tall, kept to himself, always wore a small red pin on his jacket. The man had registered under the name Viktor Petrov and had stayed for 3 days, checking out immediately after Michael's accident. The credit card he used was later determined to be fraudulent, the address in Moscow non-existent. Petrov had vanished, but his presence so close to the scene raised troubling questions. Rousseau quietly added this information to his growing file, still uncertain what it all meant, but increasingly convinced that Michael's accident had not been simply bad luck. Working with international contacts, Rousseau discovered something else disturbing. A series of large bets placed against Michael winning his final championship back in 2012. Most had been placed through offshore accounts, but one name appeared repeatedly in the transaction records: Alexei Vasilyev, a Russian gambling operator with alleged connections to organized crime. When Rousseau obtained a photograph of Vasilyev, a chill ran through him. The man was tall with distinctive features that matched the partial descriptions of Viktor Petrov. Could they be the same person? The connection seemed tenuous until Rousseau learned that Vasilyev's gambling operation had lost millions when Michael secured his final championship points. A grudge carried for years, perhaps. A grudge worth acting on? In 2018, 5 years after the accident, Dr. Olivier Laurent, who had been first on the scene at Maribel and had since moved to a hospital in Paris, reached out to Rousseau. "I've been thinking about the Schumacher case," he said when they met. "Something has always bothered me about the helmet." "The GoPro mount weakness?" Rousseau asked. "Not just that. When we removed his helmet in the helicopter, I noticed unusual marks on the inside, small scratches or scoring that didn't match the external damage patterns. I mentioned it in my report, but with the urgency of his condition, it wasn't prioritized." "You think the helmet was tampered with beyond just adding the mount?" Dr. Laurent hesitated. "I'm not making accusations, but in all my years treating skiing accidents, I've never seen internal helmet damage like that. It was as if something had been deliberately inserted, something that would only be apparent in the event of a serious impact." This revelation sent Rousseau back to the evidence storage, where Michael's helmet remained preserved. Using more advanced scanning technology than had been available years earlier, he detected what appeared to be microscopic metal fragments embedded in the helmet lining, fragments that had no business being there. Further analysis revealed something shocking. The fragments matched a type of hardened steel used in precision tools. They had been carefully placed at key structural points, invisible to casual inspection, but potentially catastrophic in a high-impact collision. This was no longer a theory about a compromised helmet design. This was evidence of deliberate sabotage. Rousseau digested this disturbing information. Another piece of the puzzle emerged from an unexpected source. Rubens Barrichello, Michael's former teammate, and the friend who had called with a warning on the morning of the accident, contacted Rousseau through the Brazilian embassy. "I've been carrying this for too long," Barrichello explained when they spoke. "The dream I told Michael about, it wasn't just a dream. I received an anonymous email the night before his accident. It said only, 'Your friend should avoid the slopes tomorrow. Some debts take years to collect.' Why didn't you tell this to investigators at the time? Rousseau asked, struggling to contain his frustration. I thought it was a prank, Barrichello replied, his voice heavy with regret. Racing drivers get threats sometimes. It comes with fame. I warned Michael, but I didn't take it seriously enough myself. By the time I realized it might be real, he was already fighting for his life, and telling this seemed pointless. Rousseau thanked him for coming forward, even after so many years. The investigation had moved from suspicion to certainty. Michael Schumacher's accident had been no accident at all. Present day, nearly 12 years had passed since that fateful day at Maribel. The world of Formula One had transformed in many ways, but one thing remained constant: the legend of Michael Schumacher. Even as new champions emerged, Michael's records and legacy continued to inspire a new generation of drivers. Among them was his son. Mick Schumacher had fulfilled the dream many thought impossible, rising through the racing ranks to earn a place in Formula One. Though he didn't yet have his father's 7 world championships, he had inherited Michael's work ethic, technical understanding, and quiet determination. After finishing a race at the Hungaroring circuit in Hungary, Mick was approached by a man he didn't recognize, elderly, with thinning white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Mick Schumacher? The man asked, his German accent thick but understandable. Yes, Mick replied cautiously. Years in the spotlight had taught him to be wary of strangers, especially those who sought him out after races. My name is Anton Weiss, the man said, extending a weathered hand. I worked at the laboratory in Lyon that analyzed your father's blood samples after his accident. Mick stiffened. Few things could catch his attention like a direct reference to his father's condition, a subject the family still protected fiercely. I have information, Anton continued in a low voice. Something that was missed. Something important. Normally, Mick would have politely excused himself. The family had dealt with countless approaches over the years. Conspiracy theorists, journalists with exclusive angles, even psychics claiming to have contacted Michael's spirit. But something in the old man's eyes, a clear intelligence and genuine concern, made him pause. My car is over there, Mick said, gesturing to a secluded area of the paddock. 5 minutes. When they were seated in the privacy of Mick's Mercedes, Anton Weiss explained his story. I was a pharmacologist specializing in rare compounds and their effects on the human body. After your father's accident, I was asked to perform a specialized analysis of his blood samples. Not the standard panel, but a more detailed examination. By whom? Mick asked. A French police inspector, Rousseau. He suspected something wasn't right about the accident. Mick had heard rumors over the years that questions remained about his father's fall, but the family had chosen to focus on Michael's care rather than looking backward. What did you find? Mick asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Traces of a compound. Called ZX-27, Anton replied. It's a modified benzodiazepine derivative, developed initially for military applications but never approved for use. In small doses, it causes momentary disorientation and loss of balance. In the bloodstream, it metabolizes within hours, leaving almost no trace unless you specifically test for it. Are you saying my father was drugged? Mick's voice was barely a whisper. Anton nodded gravely. The concentration was low but significant, enough to cause a momentary loss of coordination. Perfect for making an expert skier fall at a critical moment? Why are you telling me this now? Why not years ago? I did report it, Anton insisted, to Inspector Rousseau and to my superiors at the lab, but my findings were discouraged from being pursued. The case was politically sensitive. A famous person, international attention. Then I was assigned to other cases, and eventually retired. His eyes lowered. I've been trying to reach your family for years, but the protections around you are formidable. Mick sat in stunned silence. If this was true, it changed everything about that day at Maribel. His father, his hero, hadn't simply had an unlucky fall. Someone had wanted him to fall. "Do you have proof?" he finally asked. Anton reached into his jacket and withdrew a thumb drive. "Copies of my original reports and analysis. I kept them all these years. I knew someday they would matter." Mick took the drive, his hand trembling slightly. "I need to verify this." "Of course," Anton agreed, "but be careful. Whoever did this went to extreme lengths. They wouldn't want this information coming to light, even after all this time." After parting ways with Anton, Mick made 2 calls. The first was to his mother, giving her a carefully worded update that wouldn't alarm her if anyone was listening. The second was to Inspector Thomas Rousseau, whose contact information Anton had provided. Rousseau, now nearing retirement, agreed to meet Mick in Geneva the following day. Despite the passage of years, the inspector had never truly abandoned the case. To learn that Mick was now pursuing answers gave him a renewed sense of purpose. When they met at a discreet location near Lake Geneva, Rousseau brought his own files, far more extensive than Mick had imagined. Together with Dr. Olivier Laurent, who joined them shortly after, they began piecing together a story more disturbing than Mick had ever suspected. "Your father's accident was the result of a carefully orchestrated plan," Rousseau explained, spreading photographs and documents across the table. "The helmet was tampered with, not just the GoPro mount, but internal modifications that would ensure maximum damage upon impact. And now, with Dr. Weiss's evidence about the drug, we have the full picture." "But who would do this?" Mick asked, the question that had haunted Rousseau for years. "We believe it was this man," Rousseau said, sliding a photograph across the table. "Alexei Vasiliev, also known as Viktor Petrov, a Russian with connections to illegal gambling operations across Eastern Europe." The face meant nothing to Mick, but the next part of Rousseau's explanation made his blood run cold. "Vasiliev's organization lost millions when your father secured his final championship points. They had placed enormous bets against him winning that year. So, this was revenge? For a gambling loss?" Mick felt sick. "Or perhaps to prevent further losses," Dr. Laurent suggested. "There were rumors your father was considering a more active role with Ferrari's development team. His technical insights could have given them an edge for years to come." As they continued to review the evidence, more connections emerged. The mysterious skier Felix Dam had seen following the Schumacher family had been identified but never questioned thoroughly. A man matching Petrov's description who disappeared immediately after the accident. They learned that Petrov had connections to a former mechanic with access to the specialized equipment needed to modify the helmet. And most disturbing of all, they discovered that Petrov had been spotted at the hospital in Grenoble during Michael's treatment, somehow gaining access to the secured floor where Michael was being treated. "What was he doing there?" Mick asked, alarmed at the thought of this man near his unconscious father. "We don't know," Rousseau admitted. "He was seen by security cameras, but never identified at the time. He used a medical staff access card that had been reported missing. As the picture became clearer, Dr. Laurent re-examined photos of Michael's helmet that had been preserved in the case file. He noticed something overlooked in previous analyses: tiny pinprick marks on the inside that didn't match the crash damage. "These are signs of tampering," he explained. "Someone deliberately weakened the structure in ways that would only become apparent in a serious impact." The truth that finally emerged was chilling. Michael Schumacher's accident hadn't been just bad luck or a momentary lapse in judgment. It had been a calculated attack by someone who had held a grudge for years, someone who had carefully planned and executed a scheme that appeared to be nothing more than a tragic skiing accident. Rubens Barrichello's warning call hadn't been based on a dream, but on a real threat, one that he hadn't taken seriously enough until it was too late. The anonymous email he received had been no prank, but a calculated intimidation, perhaps even a twisted form of gloating from someone who knew what was about to happen. "What do we do with this information?" Mick asked, his mind reeling from the revelations. "Legally, it's challenging after so much time," Rousseau admitted. "Petrov is believed to be in Russia now, beyond the reach of French authorities. But knowing the truth, that matters. And perhaps there are still ways to pursue justice." After the meeting, Mick drove home in silence, the weight of knowledge heavy on his shoulders. How would he tell his mother? Gina Maria? The truth would reopen wounds that had never fully healed. Yet as he approached the gates of their estate, Mick felt a strange sense of clarity. Learning that his father had been targeted didn't change the family's dedication to his care. If anything, it strengthened their resolve. Michael hadn't simply had an unlucky accident. He had been attacked, and still he fought on. That evening, Mick sat beside his father's bed, as he had thousands of times before. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of medical equipment that had become so familiar over the years. "Dad," he began softly, "we know what happened now." Mick explained everything: the tampered helmet, the drug that caused disorientation, the gambling connection, the years of investigation that had finally revealed the truth. "It wasn't just bad luck," Mick continued, holding his father's hand. "Someone wanted to hurt you. But they didn't win, Dad. You're still here. We're still here with you. The race isn't over." As he spoke, Mick noticed something on the monitoring equipment, a slight change in the pattern of readings. He had seen these fluctuations before when his father seemed to be responding to voices or music. "Dr. Keller says you can hear us," Mick said. "That you understand on some level. I've always believed that. I've felt it." He continued talking, telling his father about his own racing season, about Gina Maria's latest equestrian victory, about normal family matters that seemed so precious in the context of all they had endured. "Mom's still the strongest person, No," Mick said with a small smile. "She never gave up on you. None of us have." As Mick prepared to leave, something unexpected happened. Something the medical team had documented occasionally over the years, but that still seemed miraculous each time. Michael's fingers moved slightly, squeezing his son's hand in a gesture that might have been reflex or might have been something more. Mick froze, his breath catching. These moments were rare, precious gifts that sustained the family through years of uncertainty. "I felt that, Dad," he whispered. "I know you're in there." Outside Michael's room, Corinna waited. The lines of years were etched on her face, but her eyes still held the same determination that had carried their family through this long journey. "Did you tell him?" she asked quietly. Mick nodded. "Everything." "Good," Corinna said. "No more secrets." Michael always valued truth above all else. Together, they walked to the large windows overlooking Lake Geneva. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, a scene of beauty that continued regardless of human tragedy or triumph. "What happens now?" Mick asked. Corinna considered the question. "Now we continue, as we always have, one day at a time. Justice may come or it may not. But our job remains the same. We keep faith. We keep fighting. Just like Dad taught us, Mick said softly. Just like Dad, Corinna agreed. Inside the quiet room behind them, Michael Schumacher continued his longest, most difficult race. One measured not in laps or seconds, but in the love of those who refused to give up hope. Whether he would ever cross the finish line remained unknown, but he would never race alone. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories like this one. We post new content every week that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might find it interesting. By sharing, you're helping spread awareness and kindness throughout our community. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.